All right, so we've taken a look at how to create REST services on the middle tier. We'd like to also take a look at how is it that you would consume these services from React, right? So the first couple of slides here just walk you through setting up the server, which you already have done, and it assumes that that you can create a middle tier that exposes a Java application and starts off with a course web service, which we have already started doing that, right? The only notice that you have faculty has many courses, courses has many modules, modules, lessons, topics, widgets. So here's a course with the ID and the title, which we already have done, and here's a service for being able to retrieve all the services, right? With an array of courses and be able to retrieve all the courses from the API. Now let's look at the React side, right? I want to be able to consume that content from React. How would I do that? So this walks you through creating a client. We have done that already. The whiteboard, that's all news. The whiteboard, everything. So let's just step through this until I found it. All right. So here's course lists and course rows. I think this is what you've worked on already. Being able to render a list of courses using a table. Right now, you're retrieving those courses from a local course service, right? That has an array of JSON objects that you load from some JSON file. So we want to replace that so that it comes to the HTTP service, right? And retrieves it from the server and then renders this. So here's course list. Course list just laying it out as a table, and then having a course row for each one of the rows. It's using stateful sessions as stateful components as opposed to stateless, but that's fine. And just rendering several courses. So let's see how retrieving data from the web service in React. So typically what you do is that you have the same identical course service that you have today, right? But instead of the functions returning actual arrays, what they're going to do is that they're going to go off and hit the server. Right? They're going to generate a get, a post, a delete, right? And they're going to receive responses back from the server, right? So for instance, here in the course service, the implementation for find all courses, instead of returning the array, the local array, right? Instead, you're going to do a fetch. Fetch is going to generate an asynchronous HTTP request to whatever URL you tell it to. In this case, the URL is a website under whiteboard.heroku.com API/course, right? Or courses, right? So it's going to do a fetch, right? And notice that it says arrow, and then fetch. That means that whatever the fetch returns, this is what this function returns. Yes. And so fetch to the API to the URL. Also notice that there's a dot then there, right? So what happens here is that here we have two processes talking to one another. We have the browser process and we have the server process. They could be halfway across the world, right? In location geographically not co-located, right? They could be in different places of the world. So this communication is me hitting a server somewhere in the cloud, and since in JavaScript. In the browser, there's only one thread running for this JavaScript, so I cannot risk having this one single thread wait for this server to respond. Right? I cannot just wait until the server, a couple milliseconds later or a second or never, come back to me with any response. So instead, what we use is a mechanism called promises. Right? Promises is a mechanism that decouples two processes and says, tell me what you want, right? And go off and do whatever. Just tell me, and go off and do whatever you need to do. I'll let you know when it's over, right? I promise. In a minute, I'll let you know what's going on. So basically, what JavaScript is doing is delegating this asynchronous communication to the browser. The JavaScript itself can only have one thread, but the browser can have any number of threads, right? So it's delegating and say, hey browser, right? Run a thread for me. And go off and do this AJAX call for me, and call me back at some point, right? When it comes back, I need to go and do other things. I need to go and animate some cats or whatever, right? I need to do other things. Meanwhile, right? The thread hits the server comes back, and here's a response. Here's the response. Notice that .then is a function that is returned by the fetch. The fetch returns immediately. It doesn't wait for the servers to come back. Returns immediately, and what it returns is a promise object. And the promise object allows us to register a callback function where we want to be notified, right? So we don't have to wait. So our callback function is this one right here. It says, whenever it comes back with a response, notify me, let me know. Call this function, which is an anonymous function. It doesn't do much. What does it do? It takes a response, and the response is going to have lots of things. It's going to have cookies. It's going to have a whole bunch of headers. It's going to have the status. It's going to have a body. I care about the body in this case, right? Because the courses are going to be embedded in the body, right, of that response. Right? It's going to be a JSON object embedded in that response. And so here we're parsing that body and converting it into JSON. .json is a function that takes the body of the response and converts it into a JSON representation. Okay? Obviously, it works if indeed there is a JSON object in the body. It would fail if it doesn't. It would say, unable to parse response, blah blah blah, whatever. So what gets returned, right, eventually from this is what gets returned immediately from this fetch, right, is a promise. Whoever calls this is not getting the data. Right? What they're getting is a promise that they're going to get the data, right, in a bit. So where do we call this? Where can we call this? There's a whole bunch of places to call this, depending on whether you're using Redux or you're not using Redux. Right? So for this assignment, there is no Redux, right, because we're doing all the old way of doing courses and modules and lessons and all that, which doesn't use Redux, right? So we're going to use the old way of doing this. In our case, we could put it in different places. This one doesn't use a singleton, but I suggest we use the singleton example I provided. Did I provide? I thought I sent over a slide going around with how to use singletons. Here we're just instantiating the course service, right? And we're calling it in componented mount. Right? Notice that we're initializing the state to be courses, an empty array of courses. Right? So it's empty. So if you try to iterate over it, it's just nothing going to be there. Right? There'll be something there at some point after I call find all courses. Right? It says this.course service.find all courses. Find all courses, as I mentioned earlier, it immediately returns, and it returns a promise, right, which I can then register for a callback using the .then. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying .then, right, notify me when it comes back. Right? And what comes back is whatever I parse from the JSON object, right, from the JSON body, right? And that's what comes back here, and it's the courses object, which I then set the state to courses : courses. See that? Right? Everything from there on is just plain old iterate over the courses. Right? It's whatever you already have should work without modification. Right? The only piece here that changes is that you no longer use the hard-coded array, right? That you rewrite your functions, find all, find by ID, all those. You rewrite them so in terms of fetch, right? And the use of promises, okay? And you rewrite it so that your componented mount is the one who does the query for the service and then maps it to the state. Beyond that is basically the same, right? It's iterate over this, calculate all the course rows, use the map, right, to iterate and generate all the course rows. That stays identical, right? There should not be any change to your HTML, right, to your component. It's only the glue between the React component and the server. Okay. All right. New course form is where you would post a brand new course, right? So, for instance, in course lists or course tables or whatever you called it, you might have maybe at the top a form that allows you to create a brand new course, right? So there might be that you have an add button that and as you type the title or the course, you're updating the state, right? That's the same, right? That doesn't change. You set the state, the target values for for any new course target value. That's fine. That's the same. But to create the object in the course services, you're going to do a fetch again, right? In the current implementation, you do maybe a push to the current array. Yes. So you're going to replace that. That's going to be gone because there's not going to be any array anymore, right? The client is not going to maintain any state. The client is only ever going to have a copy of whatever the server tells it the state is. Right? The server is going to maintain all this, right? So here's a post. Notice that there's a fetch. Now fetch by default is a get. So if you say fetch and you give it a URL and that's it, it'll do a get. If you want something else other than a get, you have to specify it. You have to tell it. Right? So in this case, we don't want a get. Right? We want to do a post. So we're going to do fetch the same URL as before. The same URL. We want to send the object, the brand new course object, right? Instead of pushing it to the array, right? We're going to JSON.stringify. JSON.stringify takes a JSON object and it converts it into a string representation. Right? That's all we could put in the body. The body has to be a string. Right? It's formatted as a JSON, but it's really a string. Right? On the other side, right? The Java in the request body needs to convert it into an instance Java. Right? So it needs to make sure that what's coming in is indeed JSON or XML. Right? In this case, we're going to tell it, hey, I'm passing you a string, but you should interpret that string as JSON. You shouldn't interpret it anything else other than a JSON. And the way we do that is that we add in the headers. In the headers, we say, this is the MIME type of what I'm passing you. It's not a PDF. It's not a Word document. It's a string formatted as JSON. Okay? That's how we say. We say content type application JSON. That's exactly what we do in Postman, right? Postman. And finally, the method :post. So notice that that's one big JSON object. See that that starts here, right? It ends right here. It's a configuration object. How I want fetch to behave. Other than that, it's the same. Then the response parse the JSON. Right? That stays the same. So typically, here's the create. Right? The create parses out the course from the body, sets a random ID, and adds the course to the courses. Yes? Yes, let's do that. Thank you. The only thing I also wanted to mention is that if you add a new course, right, the client needs to know that there is a new course. It needs to go and fetch the courses again. Right? I just wanted to point that out. Anyway, this should keep you